Hi all, Rick here with a video touching on a question I think we all asked at one point. Starfleet designs are iconic and all, but why the saucer? Why specifically a saucer shape featured in almost every vessel? The real-world origin for this begins with Matt Jeffries and Gene Roddenberry's plans for the Enterprise. They did not want rockets, or arrow-shaped ships. That had been done before, and ironically they wanted to steer away from the overused flying saucer. They quickly came to the conclusion that in space you need not abide by aerodynamics. Therefore, one of the more efficient shapes might be a sphere, so that you could get everywhere you needed easily. However, every mock-up they made came to the understandable conclusion that a sphere looked slow, and they wanted their starships to zoom by. To look fast, the sphere was flattened, little by little, until they eventually said, "F it, let's go with a saucer." Since then the design stuck, and we got the Constitution-class Enterprise, but let's look at the in-universe law justifications for the design. So, looking into the history of Starfleet ship design, we can see that the Phoenix, the following Warp 2 test ships, and even early Earth cargo vessels all shared a technological path, but looked rather different. The only real similarity was the positioning of the nacelles. Of course, the shape was designed for more than this. Looking into the earliest vessels, even the Phoenix, we can see that the nacelles themselves are kept away from the hull. This is because of the levels of radiation that they emit, as well as the potential need to vent plasma. And it dictated that the safest place for them was well away from the inhabited decks. For this reason, they were extended and elevated away from the ship, which was the start of the distinctive profile, but Starfleet was far from the only species that does this. As containment becomes better with the centuries, this becomes a null issue, and the frequently cited rule that nacelles must have line of sight also saw workarounds. The first vessels were the Warp Delta, and then the Daedalus-class starships. One of these was a wedge, and the next was a sphere atop the nacelles. This is clearly an homage to the initial design ideas of having a spherical ship for space travel, first considered in the earliest junctures of Starfleet ship design. However, the Daedalus shows Starfleet clearly considering options outside of our preconceptions of rockets. It was the NX-01 Enterprise and her sister ships that established the saucer section hull shape. Now, if we take into consideration the nacelle placement as a requirement, then the rest of the vessel is basically a flying saucer, so why the design pivot? Well, for a start, shapes on Earth are limited by gravity and those that fly are limited by air resistance. Neither of those are much of a factor in starship design, which can lead to some really unique shapes, much more grandiose than saucer shapes. Additionally, materials used, such as duranium and transparent aluminum, are far stronger than contemporary materials, with them only becoming more sturdy with time. See the spindly spires of the Universe-class Enterprise J for an extreme example of this. So the first part of the reasoning is simply because it's more possible. However, we do see that not every vessel is rated for atmospheric flight, and there have been variable abilities when it comes to operating within a gravity well. Generally, however, a Constitution-class starship lies at the upper end of the scale in what is safe to bring into a planet's atmosphere, and gravity well without risk. Again, this also improves with time and additional systems like subspace lightning or structural integrity fields. So, we've established, for the most part, that ship design need not obey the same laws as aerodynamics, but there is still a profile to which they must abide: subspace dynamics. When pushing through at warp speeds, the vessel interacts with subspace layers, like a boat cutting across the surface of an ocean. Most of this is done with the creation of the warp field, a bubble around the vessel which allows for the warp effect. This bubble is made from concentric circles, like a magnetic field, and can be tightened or extended with some variability. So if the pocket of normalcy within the bending space-time is a bubble, doesn't it make sense to fill as much of that space as you can? The same is true for shields, which can be brought into a sheath that mimics the hull shape, or extended into a bubble. The saucer shape emerged as an attempt to match the warp bubble and make use of that area within. You'll note that during the late 24th century, when ships began to get faster and also compensate for subspace damage, they elongated the warp profiles and their saucer sections in tandem. Of course, a sphere might have been a better choice, but making a sphere increases the internal volume beyond what is required for most vessels, so it's mostly seen as wasted resources. I say beyond required for a specific reason too. A major problem creating designs based on rockets or long stretches is something that the Klingons know well: corridors and access. Tracts of extended straight corridor running the length of the vessel are all well and good, until they suffer damage. Debris or hull breaches along one area of a vessel requires that zone to be sealed off and containment activated, thus preventing travel down this area. Whereas with a saucer, you almost always have a workaround or alternate route to take somewhere. Of course, the Federation vessel still has its choke points, namely bridge access and vessels that have a distinct neck, but most ships provide many alternate corridors and walkways to any section. This saucer design clearly worked, for all of the above reasons. Filling a warp profile and ease of access served the NX class well, and when a secondary hull was added to refit the design and allow for larger engineering and a warp core, the iconic Federation vessel shape was born. Which brings me to the final reason that the saucer stuck around. Both in universe and beyond it, it's become an iconic shape, recognisable amongst other peoples of the quadrants as a distinctly Starfleet Federation look. Of course, wedges, ovals and even stranger designs will surface from time to time, based on necessity or style, but the saucer section is so synonymous with Starfleet now that whenever a jack-of-all-trades or flagship design is required, it evokes the silhouette of vessels past. So, what started as a way to optimise floor space and access, combined with a way to fill a warp bubble efficiently, led to a readily identifiable shape and marker of Starfleet ships. Even when the Federation moves further and further away from the limits of ship design with new innovations, they chose to return and maintain design elements on purpose. And for a counterpoint to help show this is indeed Starfleet's intention, look at the ships that they make that are not to be associated with Starfleet. The Section 31 NCIA stealth frigate, which abandons the saucer. The USS Relativity, which is a temporal agent vessel designed not to be seen if possible. Even the Defiant class, although sort of a saucer overall, is deliberately very different from your standard Starfleet mission profile, and thus dropped the saucer section. So there we go. Do you find these reasons justifiable? I banded the idea around for a while, and sure, I can accept these, but even then, the most prominent justification seems to be that Starfleet noticed it sort of became their thing and just leaned into it. While researching into this topic, I found a quick video by Utopian Broadcast on the topic too, so I'll point you over there for a little more lore content. Until the next video, however, I've been Rick, and I'll see you next time for another video. Thanks again, and goodbye.